The house slept, but Jake did not. A quiet click from the old heater, the only sound he expected. But another sound had woken him. It was a soft breath, a slow exhale that formed a word. His name. Jake. He shot upright. The blanket pooled around his waist. His heart thumped like a trapped bird. The small blue night lamp cast wavering shadows. Posters on the wall looked alien. He told himself it was the wind, a draft at the window. He forced a slow breath, trying to calm the cold fear. Dad would have laughed at him for being jumpy. Dad would have joked about ghosts in the plumbing, or some other silly thing to make him feel better. Dad had been gone 2 years. The house felt different. The biggest reminder, the locked office door down the hall. His mother had locked it the day after the funeral, turning the key. She said it was for the best, but the door felt like a wound. The voice had known his name, too clear to be wind. Soft but deliberate, like someone at his ear. It seemed to come from the hallway just outside his room. The house stayed silent. The heater clicked off. The quiet pressed in, heavier than before. He should have stayed in bed, but the whisper planted cold curiosity. Jake slid his legs out. The floorboards were cold. He wrapped the comforter around his shoulders and crept to the door. He turned the knob slowly, wincing at the squeak. The hallway stretched like a dark tunnel, moonlight at the end. The air smelled of old wood and lemon-scented cleaner his mom used. He stepped into the hall, eyes fixed on the office door. It was just a door, but tonight it seemed like a mouth waiting to speak. He stopped just a few feet from his father's office, his breath misting slightly in the chilly air. The old brass doorknob seemed to gleam faintly in the gloom. He had seen his mother polish it 100 times, but she never turned it. The door was a silent monument. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers hovering just inches from the cold metal. He wanted to touch it, to prove to himself it was just an ordinary door, locked and sealed for 2 long years. He expected the metal to be cold, but as his fingers made contact, he felt an unnerving, subtle vibration, almost like a low hum from deep within the wood. Just as his mind tried to dismiss it, the voice came again. Jake. This time there was no mistaking it. It was not the wind. It was not a dream. The sound was closer, clearer, as if someone were on the other side, lips pressed to the keyhole. The voice said his name with slow, drawn-out patience. It made the fine hairs on his arms and the back of his neck stand on end. It was not a human voice, not exactly. It had the texture of dry leaves skittering across pavement, a brittle, ancient sound that did not belong in his quiet hallway. He had found it months ago on the highest hall closet shelf while searching for a light bulb. Old, slightly tarnished, dust he wiped away before slipping it into his pocket. He hadn't known what it was for, but he'd suspected. He kept it as a secret, silent link to the forbidden part of the house. Now, holding it in his sweating palm, he knew. His hand shook so much he could barely grip it. With a surge of dread and an unstoppable pull of curiosity, he raised the key. The metal scraped softly as he pushed it into the brass lock. For a heart-stopping second, he thought it wouldn't turn. But then, a small, sharp click, loud in the silent house. The lock gave way. The door drifted open just a crack. A thin line of pale yellow light spilled out, cutting a sharp line across the dark hallway floor. The light was wrong. The room should have been pitch black. Something was on inside. Something was waiting. A strange smell drifted out from the opening, mixing with the familiar scent of the house. It was a warm, stuffy smell, like a room where a heater had been running for hours, but that was impossible. The vent in that office had been closed off years ago. Dust motes, thick as insects, danced in the narrow beam of light that escaped the room. Jake pushed the door open wider, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The office was not as he remembered it. It had been his father's chaotic sanctuary, a place of teetering stacks of books, scattered papers. Now it was unnervingly tidy. The books were perfectly aligned on the shelves, their spines forming a neat, unbroken wall. He took a slow, cautious step over the threshold, his bare feet making a soft, shuffling sound on the wooden floor. He kept one hand on the door, ready to slam it shut and run. The house behind him was utterly silent, as if it were holding its breath, watching him. On the large oak desk that dominated the room, papers were arranged in precise geometric stacks. This was the detail that felt the most wrong. His father's desk had always been a landscape of creative mess. These piles were too neat, too deliberate. The source of the light was a small brass lamp, a green glass-shaded banker lamp. It cast a sickly yellow glow across the room, throwing one huge distorted shadow that stretched up the wall and onto the ceiling. The shadow seemed to writhe and twist with the slightest movement of the air. Jake's eyes were drawn to the nameplate. It was a simple, polished block of wood with brass letters, Thomas Reed. Hesitantly, he reached out and touched the brass letters. The metal was distinctly warm. He wiped his fingers on his pajama pants, a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach. It was coming from inside the room with him, a low, intimate breath from the deepest part of the shadow near the desk. It was patient, expectant, as if it had been waiting for him for a very, very long time. Jake froze, his gaze locked on the empty space beside the desk. He tried to call out, but the word caught in his throat, choked by a fear so pure and cold it felt like ice water flooding his veins. Section 4. The Thing by the Desk. From the deep shadow beside the desk, something moved. It was not a sudden movement Bedirel, but a slow, deliberate unfolding, like a strange plant turning to the light. A small figure stepped out into the lamp's jaundiced glow. It was short, barely reaching the height of the desktop. It walked on two impossibly thin legs bent at an unnatural angle. Its skin was the color of old parchment, pale, almost translucent. Stretched tight over a delicate frame, it had no hair, and its head was a smooth, oversized dome. Its eyes were the most disturbing feature. They were huge, black, and liquid, reflecting the lamplight like polished stones. It looked at him and smiled, a slow, unnatural stretching of its thin lips that did not reach its dark, empty eyes. Jake's mind screamed at him to run. He backed away, his heel catching on the edge of a bookshelf. A cascade of his father's old paperbacks tumbled to the floor, loud and jarring in the tomb-like quiet. The small creature didn't flinch. It simply continued to watch him, head tilted to one side with a bird-like curiosity. Its movements were fluid and silent. Despite walking on the same wooden floor, its spindly feet made no sound at all. It held something in its long, delicate hands, a small, dark wooden box, intricately carved, smelling faintly of old lemon polish and dust. The creature took another silent step toward him. Its wide, unblinking eyes seemed to see right through him.
Jake, you found me.
Jake felt his throat constrict, the air trapped in his lungs. He wanted to scream, but all that came out was a strangled, hoarse whisper. What are you?" he managed to ask, voice barely his own. The thing ignored his question. It glided over to the desk and placed the small wooden box down with reverent care. With fingers far too long and thin, it lifted the lid. The interior of the box was lined with faded red velvet. Lying in the center was a single small scrap of yellowed paper. Written in shaky, spidery ink was his name. Jake. His eyes locked on the handwriting. It looked familiar, terrifyingly, impossibly familiar. He remembered that handwriting from birthday cards and notes left on the kitchen counter. The loops were the same. The way the K was formed was the same. It was his father's handwriting. Yeah. Section 5, Papa is cold. A strange, desperate yearning rose in Jake's chest, momentarily pushing back the tide of fear. He had to see it, had to be sure. He took a half step forward, his hand reaching out for the scrap of paper as if it were a lifeline. He needed to touch it, to feel the paper his father might have touched. As his fingers drew near, the creature snatched the box away with a sudden, jerky movement. It let out a sound that might have been a laugh, a soft, dry, rattling noise, like a faulty clock ticking down its final seconds. "Papa wrote this," the thing whispered. "He missed you. He wrote your name so loud that I heard it, so you would come." Jake stared at the creature, his mind reeling. "Why are you here?" Jake asked, his voice barely audible. "What do you want?" The thing's smile widened, stretching its pale face into a grotesque mask. A faint puff of air came from its mouth. It carried the scent of lemons, warm dust, the very essence of the house concentrated into one cloying breath. "Because you opened the door," it said. "Because you have been thinking his name. You called, and I came." It pointed one long, thin finger at him. Jake saw a small, dark mark on its knuckle, like an old ink stain. It was the shape of two letters. T-R. "Put the paper down," Jake pleaded, his own voice sounding distant and weak. "Please, just leave it." The creature's huge black eyes seemed to fill with a strange internal light. It tilted its smooth head, lamplight glinting off its polished eyes. "Jake," it said, its voice now softer than ever, almost seductive. "Do you want to hear him? Do you miss his voice?"
Yes.
The creature stood perfectly still, a silent statue in the yellow light. Then its smile faded, replaced by an expression of intense concentration. It reached back into the box and pulled out a tiny folded piece of paper, which it carefully unfolded. The sound was so perfect, so real, that the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The lamp hummed. The creature stepped forward, moving so close that Jake could see the distorted reflection of his own terrified face in its enormous black eyes. Its smile returned, wider and more terrible than before. The door to the office clicked shut behind him, plunging the hallway into darkness.
Jake, come sit. Papa is cold.